Hello, everyone. I'm Traci Arieli, end of life doula and founder of Comforting Closure. Welcome to another episode. Today, we're exploring the connection between art, spirituality, and life review. My guest, Louise Silk, is a celebrated quilt maker and fiber artist whose work beautifully combines memory, legacy, and community. Through quilting, she's not only told her own story, but has also created spaces for others to reflect, share, and heal. As an example, her Witness Quilt, a powerful evolving piece made up of over 1,000 embroidered wisdoms, has invited people from all walks of life to contribute their own voices. And as we record this episode, this incredible quilt is being dismantled and given away in pieces. We'll also explore how Louise's Jewish heritage influences her work and why reflecting on our lives through creativity or conversation is one of the most meaningful things we can do. So grab a warm drink, find a comfortable seat, and join us for the conversation. Louise, thank you so much for being here.
Sure, my pleasure.
Can you start to tell us about yourself and your journey to becoming a quilter and fiber artist?
Yes. I was just an average high school student, didn't do too much of anything, and I took home economics, and I really loved it. And this is way back in the 70s, actually in the 60s, and I went to school for home economic education, and while I was there, the women's movement occurred, and I joined a consciousness raising group. And in that day, it was about finding out really what what women had to offer society, and also what limitations were put on them. And it was all about just finding out really what was available for you as a person and as a woman, for what you could do, for me in that case. And in that consciousness raising and that home economic education, I read an article in Ms. Magazine in the first year of its production about quiltmaking as a woman's art form, and it talked about how men didn't care about it, so they left women off to do this beautiful work. And I didn't know anyone that quilted. I had no experience with quilts at all. There weren't any in my family, but I read the article and I knew that that's what I was going to do. And I started. It took me a year and a half to make my first quilt, and then it's just a journey from then till now.
In your work, life review is an important part of the end of life process. Your book, A Patchwork Life, beautifully illustrates how memories, experiences, and reflections come together, much like a quilt. How do you see quilting as a metaphor for life review? And I just have to say that book is so beautiful and is so well done. Thank you so much for creating it.
Yes. I had tried to write a book in the late 90s, and I called it A Patchwork Life. And actually I came upon, people were always using the quilt metaphor, because it's a great metaphor, because it's all these little pieces put together. And I got kind of angry, and I said, you know what, that's my metaphor. If anyone has a right to that, I'm going to use that. And I used that name, A Patchwork Life, because I felt like it really described what I do, because I'm a quilt maker. But of course, lots of people use that metaphor because it is a beautiful idea. Even looking at the background of behind you, it's all these kind of interesting, intricate little pieces put together to make a beautiful frame. And so it's just the perfect name, and it's particularly perfect for me, who that's what I do. Yeah. So I don't know what else I was supposed to say, but
I know that you mentioned in some of the articles I read for you about you that each piece in a quilt represents a moment of time, almost like marking
right.
a point in time. Can you talk about how quilting helps capture and preserve significant life events?
Yes. I wasn't always aware of that fact. Of course, I would look at a quilt and I would remember a fabric, or um, I would remember something about it. But the whole experience got heightened and enriched for me when my parents died, and I was very close with them. And I took all of their clothing and textiles. I took everything out of their closet and brought it over to my studio. And then I determined that I would use every article of their clothing, every stitch of fabric, and make quilts for the family. And I ended up making over 36 pieces with all of it. It was a lot of fabric, all of that, and over a period of years. But then as I would look at each piece, I would really remember something. I even have a picture of my mother wearing a jacket, and then I would see the piece in the quilt, or I have a quilt on my bed now that has my husband's hat, piece of his hat in it, and has a robe from when I was at the Rochester Zen Center. And so like you just need this little, and you don't need a lot of it. I mean, you could have a whole hat if you were wearing a hat, but also you could have just a little piece of a hat, and you would remember the hat, seeing someone wearing it, maybe sometime that it fell on the ground. It just brings back a whole range of experiences and emotions.
I loved how that story, I know that one of the pieces that you did, it was a very moving piece, but you were the dot on the I. And I remember that story so well. And that's really what brought that question up for me was,
Right.
that one point in time that you had the ceremony. And it was such a beautiful ceremony that you
Right.
had.
I had an exhibition. It's kind of a long story, but basically, I'm Jewish. I have Jewish heritage, and no one in my family quilted, and I really didn't know why. And it turns out it just has to do with assimilation, that the Jews in my family were Ashkenazi Jews from Europe, and they did the needlework of knitting and crocheting and needlepoint. And so they weren't exposed to American patchwork. Only I'm assimilated now in American culture enough to be exposed to read an article in Ms. Magazine. So I had always kept the two parts separate, quilters and Jews, and I did a lot with in each area. But then all of a sudden one day I got the idea, what if I would quilt Jewish? Because I think I was looking for something. I was looking for something new and interesting. And that ended up taking me on this whole journey of doing a whole series on being Jewish. And I decided to learn about Judaism and quilt it while I was learning it, as that's my vehicle. And I didn't know anything really about Judaism. I was a cultural Jew. Like, I didn't understand that the calendar revolved around the moon, and that why do we stand up and sit down in the synagogue? I had no idea. So I studied with rabbis and classes, and I made this exhibit. And then I realized in the exhibit, it's more than an art exhibit. It's really about a religion. It's about a spirituality. And I went to a young rabbi that I knew at the time, and I explained this whole story to her of how I was, what I've just said to you. And she said, "Oh, it looks like you're trying to find your voice." And in Judaism, there's this term, it's called kol isha. It means woman's voice, but it's a negative term. It's the term that says that men don't really want to hear a woman's voice because it might arouse them, and it might keep them, divert them from what they were supposed to be doing. So what I did was I made a ritual for the exhibit, and I asked 36 women who I knew. And what I did was I found things that Jewish women had said over time out loud that were important. I started with Sarah and Abraham, and I went all the way through to people like Bella Abzug and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and they had things to say. And the women had a place to stand in the exhibit place where their bodies formed the word voice where they were standing in the exhibit. And then because I was 43 at the time, I decided if I lived till 86, I'd be happy with that. And I ended up being the dot on the I, which was the point in time that you're referring to.
Yep.
And it was my midlife ritual, my midlife point. And that's how that occurred. And yes, it was a point in time. Well remembered.
Yes, I absolutely. That was a wonderful story to share. The Witness Quilt, I know, contains different pieces of wisdom, thousands. And I know that you invited others to contribute their own stories to that quilt. How do you see quilting as a communal healing practice? And since I know that we just spoke today, you started really taking apart the quilt and giving away those pieces.
Making.
Yeah, I want to hear about that. So let's talk about that also.
Okay. Well, it's a many layered process. Actually, the quilt itself is many layered. And when I became a grandmother, I determined that I was going to be called Bubby, but I wasn't gonna be that old Bubby that you think of that sits home and makes chicken soup and just doesn't do anything. I'm going to be the new Bubby, and I ended up calling myself Bubby Wisdom. And then I started to make these statements. And like in the old days, they would call it booby mices. It was kind of a derogatory term. Booby mices mean like little gossips that bubbies would tell, but mine were bubby wisdoms. And then I started putting them onto fabric. And the Witness quilt is all of these little positive affirmations embroidered onto a piece of fabric, and all leftovers. They're all just pieces that weren't being used for anything else. And then I asked other stitchers if they wanted to participate with me, and we had about 25 people that contributed. No, 25 people that stitched, but even more people who just would bring in a piece of fabric or something that they wanted to be put into the quilt. And so the quilt exhibit that the Witness Quilt is in the Heinz History Center, and it opened September 1st. And we put the quilt up, and then we just kept building on it and building it and building it and building it until last night we had an unmaking ritual, and we began to take the pieces off. And the idea is to and then give them out to the public. So every day that I'm there, we're giving out 50 pieces. We take off 50 and then give them out the next day. And the idea of I was trying to get to so many of the older quilting ideas that have fallen away, but really need to be back. Just for example, just go back to the Ms. Magazine article. Quilt making was really important, so men left it out by themselves. As fiber has gotten more important in the art community, it's been changed. It's been it's more competitive, and it's harder to get it in an exhibition, and it's are you art or are you craft? There's all these issues where if you're in a community and you're just exchanging ideas, and it's not competitive at all, it's cooperative, and it's a way to be with people and spread your wisdom and share your skills. And that's really what I wanted to embody in this quilting experience.
Yeah. What has been the most unexpected moment you've experienced with engaging with visitors that are contributing to the Witness Quilt?
I have had so many experiences. Well, just today, I had a caregiver with 4 special needs, young adult men. And they came in, and everyone comes in. I say, we're unmaking this quilt. If you would like a patch, we're sending them home with you today. And the caregiver looks at them, and they kind of look at me, and they aren't really verbal at all. And I'm not sure. And I said, I'm thinking, I don't even know, maybe they would have trouble reading it. But anyway, so I just said to them, how about if I just hold them up and read them to you? And I started to do it and they were very, again, nonverbal and hardly moved. But all of a sudden, one gentleman, his eyes lit up. And I said, oh, you like this one? I'm going to give you this one. And we have a ritual where we roll it up and put it, and I gave each of them one. And then I said to the caregiver, would you like one? And it was a beautiful experience. That happened today. Another one that happened today, I had someone who, there's a magazine article about me in the Heinz History Center magazine. And this woman came in, and she was a librarian from a small town outside of Pittsburgh. And the magazine came into her library, and she saw my picture on the cover, and she read the article, and she came today to see the exhibit and then to pick one of the patch. It's really funny to watch the people pick the patchworks, because they're good. There's like, it's hard to pick the one that really speaks to you and then to go through that process. And yeah, so that happened today. I had a rabbi who isn't practicing anymore who happened to come, and you can see that people are very moved by it and really excited to uh, to meet me and to take a piece home.
I think part of legacy, everyone wants to leave some bit of wisdom, some part of themselves after they leave the earth. And through your quilting, your quilts are really a part of you and a part of your wisdom. Every single one of them. It has been really special. Not only the wisdom quilt, and most people, when they're looking at leaving part of their legacy or doing a life review, they think in terms of, hey, maybe I should write my life story, or maybe I should do some grand financial gesture. And people don't realize how art can be used for that and how meaningful it is.
One person, there's a pile of 50 to choose from, and there's a lot that are still on the quilt. And she said, there's one over here on the other side. Do you think I could have that? And I said, of course you can. And it had the word imagine on it. And actually it was a t-shirt. It was someone's t-shirt. I hadn't even embroidered it. It was a printed word imagine. And she said her grandmother, who was deceased, always said that word to her. And she was just really happy so it wasn't her grandmother, but it was something her grandmother said, and it was a piece that she could take from this exhibit. So then again, you get to these layers of, she'll have this piece, it'll remind her of being at the exhibit, it'll remind her of her grandmother, it will help her to imagine, it's enriching for her in general.
I don't know if this is the only or the first time that you've made a quilt that you're dismantling and giving pieces away as part of the project, as part of the art. Is it difficult to do that, to give parts of it away? And what does that mean to you in terms of letting go, and in the larger picture of letting go of some of your legacy and grief?
Well, first let's start with the idea of, for me, I'm prolific. I've made hundreds of quilts. And so someone asked me today, do you have a favorite here? And my answer to that is, it's the next one. So that the next one is going to be just as good, if not better, than the one before it. So that helps a lot with that letting them go. That's the first thing. The other thing is that the grief, that's an interesting idea, because I don't have any. My daughter might have a little grief. She might be a little more clingy to them than I am. But to me, it's, again, it's so much more about process. And in this case, I can see the joy that I'm helping with these people. And, it's great. There's generosity is really what drives me in this case. And so, I don't know, I can't find a place for grief in that.
That's wonderful. Like, I know you're Jewish, and your spirituality, you've studied the Kabbalah, but also you've studied other spiritualities also, Buddhism, I believe, and I think that's reflected, or might be reflected, in some of your other quilts, like moving through loss. I know that you explore a more ritual and impermanence and change. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Right. Well, when I had the exhibit, when I took my parents' materials, I ended up having an exhibit on about them and their materials. And again, I went to now. Remember the first time I did that, I went to a rabbi, and this time I went to a Zen Buddha, a Buddhist monk, a person I knew, and I tell her the whole story, you know, going all the way through. And she says, well, have you ever seen the Tibetan monks? They make these sand mandalas, and they take these little tiny dots of sand and they build them over days, 4, 5, 6 days. They build these really intricate sand mandalas, and it's sand. And as soon as they're finished, they blow it away. She said, you should unmake a quilt, which kind of the Witness Quilt comes from that understanding. So in that exhibit, I asked other people to give me their materials of memory, and I made them into, because it was about my parents passing on. I decided that I'm going up to the forefront, so it's like I have to show now. And I made like a peacock image. I made a coat, and I made each of their materials of memory a peacock feather. And then they came to the ritual, and it was all made up into this image, and they came, and then we removed the feathers. So they took back the materials of memory, transformed into these peacock feathers. And I want just to tell you a funny story about that. When we went to make the exhibit, we had, I don't own a lot of the work. The work is in a lot of different people's hands. And there's one piece that was really important that they wanted in the exhibit that a friend of mine bought, and her name is Peggy. And so I have to call Peggy, and when she loaned this piece for the exhibit, and it has to do with it had to do with really the first piece that I did about being Jewish. It had to do with the resettlement of the Russian Jews from the former Soviet Union. And so I call her Peggy. I've talked to her in years. Does she even have the piece? And I call her and I talk to her, and I said, Peggy, would you mind? Oh, she said, I'd be so honored. It's really exciting. And she said, and do you want the feather?
Wow.
And I said, you have the feather? She said, doesn't everybody still have their feather?
Oh, that's hilarious. Love that. What has quilting taught you about the balance between holding on to memories and embracing change? Because each one of those parts of the quilt is a memory. All right.
Yes. Well, again, you don't need very much.
No.
Just need a little piece. And it's just so interrelated. One works right off of the other. And again, I get back to the word generous. If you're really generous with yourself and with your process, and then with the materials. And by the way, that's hard for quilters, because quilters are always taking every little piece and trying to make it fit and not use too much of the fabric. And so that's a challenge for quilters in general. And I have this idea about really trying to use all the remnants. So I'm kind of working on that project. So
I understand about that, being a knitter and a spinner. Like if I have leftover yarn from a project, I'm like, okay, I got to use it in another project. I have to find a place to use it. So I have tons of like skeins and unfinished skeins of yarn.
Little pieces of leftovers. Yeah. But then you'll have it.
Yeah.
And you don't have to buy something new. You can reuse something old. And that's so prevalent now today. People are really starting with liking mending and reusing. And a lot of my work is about reused textiles, and the whole Witness Quilt is made out of reused textiles and yarns.
It's interesting because usually people do life review at the end of their lives. But you've been doing this type of review throughout your life. How has being able to reflect on your life through your artwork impacted your sense of purpose and your spirituality, just how you live every day? It must have a huge impact.
It does have a huge impact. And it was so interesting for me to talk to you, because when you first contacted me, I assumed that you would want to talk about memory quilts because that's really, it seemed to me that's what you would be talking about in what you do is your work. And then when you wanted to talk to me about life review, because you know what, it's just part of me. It is a part of me that I do without really, I hadn't really thought about it. I was surprised that that's what you wanted to talk about. Uh, and um, I think it's just kind of my nature, but it really works. And it works because I have the experiences and, I don't need the material possessions, but I have the experiences. I have the memories. I have the little piece of that and the little piece of this. And um, the important thing for me uh, was that when the pandemic hit and I was really upset. I missed my 70th birthday and I was like, oh, like, how's this going to turn out now? And I made an idea. I thought, so I made a commitment to myself that I would enact a 10-year plan, which, by the way, now I'm already in the 4th year of that plan, that I would really try to understand in my quilting world and in my home world too, but in my personal world, but primarily in my quilting world, that I would bring everything to completion. I would know that I had accomplished what I wanted to. I didn't even know. I have all the time I've been doing it. I've just been kind of, each thing is coming to me and I'm taking it as far as I can take it. And I'm not really thinking about that in the life review perspective. But now I am. Now I'm being very purposeful about it. And I just made a commitment to my daughter she works with me. We do this denim work together. And we just made a commitment for this next 5 years that I will help her even make a curriculum, so to speak, to teach her all of the skills that I have so that we'll know that we've been successful, that we have accomplished what we wanted to in our work. And for me, that I will feel, and when I'm 80, it doesn't mean I'm going to stop quilting, but at least I'll know that I got to this point in time that I can feel really good about what I've accomplished.
I don't think that people realize, most people, you do, but most people don't realize how that life review, how important it is, and that knowledge, that wisdom, how important it is to pass along to their children and to future generations. You might not be here to see your great grandchildren or your great great grandchildren, but they should know about you and they should know about your wisdom. And I really believe, my parents don't like talking about themselves. They just don't. And last time I visited them in Chicago, I said, listen, you're in your 80s now. We need to start recording your life. We need to do life review, because once you guys are gone, and I hate to say that, but once you're gone, if we don't have this knowledge, we will have lost a part of ourselves.
Yes.
And your grandchildren won't know either, but we just will have lost such a big part of ourselves.
Are they going to let you do it?
We started the taking out the picture. So hopefully next time we visit.
Well, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did that with my father and his 2 brothers they had, and I did it, and it ended up being like, we did a series of 5 taping sessions over lunch, and he ended up dying very shortly after we finished the taping, actually. So, and it is so important. And every once in a while I get it out and read it again. And there's so much information there. So people have to just realize that they wouldn't be fair.
Yeah.
They would be taking something with them that we want. And it is so rich, and it adds so much meaning for you and me.
Yep.
Yes.
Even the people, like, we asked them to go through their family and their stories. My great grandparents, I never even met, but I feel that knowing about them is so grounding, and it's part of my history. It's, my ancestral heritage, and everything that carries with it. So
I have a funny story, another kind of funny story,
please.
but my, so Silk is my ex-husband's name, but I kept the name because it's a really great name. So this woman comes in the exhibit and her last name is Silk, and she is hemming and hawing. She didn't know even she knew about me, and she would back and forth. And anyway, so we start talking, and I say, I don't think he had that Leonard, my ex-husband, that he had any more relatives. His father had a brother, and there was just the two of them. And we're talking, and we go over. I show her a picture of my ex-husband. He happens to be a picture of him in the exhibit. Does he look like anyone in your family? And then I say, they had a shoe store in Butler Street, which is a street in Pittsburgh. And she looks at me. She goes, "My grandfather was a shoe repairman."
Wow.
And now, what are the chances that two people named Silk in the city of Pittsburgh are in shoe repair and are related?
So are you guys going to look into that a little bit?
She is. Yes. It was great. And who would have known?
That's fascinating.
How did she know her grandfather was in shoe repair?
You're very lucky. You're very lucky to the universe works in mysterious ways.
It's not my family, but it's my kids' family.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Now I know that you have this 10-year plan. Now you're, 6 more years to it. For your 80th birthday, what lessons do you hope to leave behind for future generations, for your kids and grandchildren? And
well, I think you have helped me understand that it is that they themselves could have a conscious plan. We're so career oriented or like family oriented, but we aren't thinking big picture at all.
yeah.
And so I would hope that they would follow in my model and be more conscious about what they want for themselves, and then how they worked to accomplish it, and what do they have to hand down to their families.
It's so interesting to me because in our culture, I used to be in corporate America, and we'd have quarterly reviews and year planning, but we don't have that in real life. We don't have quarterly reviews to say, okay, or year end reviews to say, what did I really do last year? And what do I want to do next year? What do I want my life to be like? And it's unfortunate that we don't do that.
No. All the way along through each of the phases of my career, what I learned and saw in this exhibit is that I documented everything. I have workbooks from every quilt from the beginning of time. Of course, they're now part of the archives, which archives are a great way to assure that there's that things will be around for other people to see them. My archivist, my curator always says, think about like what people would see in 100 years from now, so that they would still understand what you were doing here today. So
what advice would you give to people who want to start doing artwork, want to start expressing who they are through their artwork, since you do it so well? What's your suggestion to them?
I think it's easy is to just start with an idea, a theme, and then don't think of it as just one piece, but think of it as a series that's going to take you through the theme. And start small, simple, and then allow yourself to move on to what seems to work for you, and just watch it grow, and just be open to new ideas, and stop and just take a walk, and remove yourself from it so that you can go back and see it over and over again, and be willing to change and to keep going on the process. Don't get stopped because you're stymied. Then find some way to just move around it or beyond it.
or cut it up and start all over again.
Yeah.
Still have something there, the remnants of that. So I think the thing is to be serious and single-minded in your process.
Yeah. And I love how you say it's all about the process. It's not like you aren't grasping onto the end result. You're really about the process and the experience. You really are into living in the present.
Yes.
So,
And that doesn't mean that, you don't remember something, like, you see something and it reminds you of something that made you unhappy or whatever. That's all part of the being in the present, actually.
Yeah.
You don't have to go back there and stay back there. You can bring it up and just, figure out how to work through it.
Wonderful. Well, I know that we are almost at the top of the hour. I wanted to thank you so much for being here and for sharing your journey and your wisdom and your process. Before we wrap up, where can people learn more about you and your work?
I will have a website, bobbywisdom.com or silkquilt.com or silkdenim.us, which is my daughter's denim work. I have an Etsy site. I'm on Instagram, just all the regular sites. I think now at this point, if you just Google Louise Silk, all those things will come up pretty easily now.
And I'll list those on the description so people could get to them. So thank you again so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for what you do again, because you made an impact on me. Just because of course, I'm just doing my process, but you helped me to step outside of it to see that bigger picture.
Thank you.
And I appreciate that.
I really, that means a lot to me because like you didn't even realize that, like that life review, as you said, I didn't realize that was, one thing I was doing that was so important, but you do it so wonderfully. And as I said, your books, and the great thing about your books is you could actually see the quilt, also the pieces and it's so well done. So well done.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So listeners, if there's one thing to take from today's conversation, it's that reflection isn't just about looking back. It's about honoring the journey, embracing the lessons, and finding meaning in the stories we tell. Whether through quilting, writing, or simply having moments of remembrance, we all have the opportunity to engage with our lives in a way that brings comfort, connection, and understanding. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please comment below or reach out to me directly. And if you found this conversation to be helpful, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. This is Traci Arieli from Comforting Closure, wishing you peace and comfort in your journey. Until next time, take care.